The canine lay trembling in the rain-soaked alley, one eye swollen shut, body pressed protectively against her fallen handler as distant footsteps faded into the dark, yet her tail still thumped weakly, refusing to surrender. Sirens never came. Radio stayed silent. Somewhere beyond the flickering streetlight, something had gone terribly wrong, and the dog knew it before anyone else did. She lifted her head, sniffed the air and growled low, not in fear but in warning. Because someone was still watching and someone else was already moving toward them from the shadows. But who would answer when the law was silenced and only loyalty remained? Officer Lena Morales had always believed that order could be restored with patience, discipline, and quiet resolve, and nowhere was that belief more visible than in the way she lived her days alongside her canine partner, a sable German shepherd named Nix whose amber eyes missed nothing and whose presence alone seemed to slow the world around them. Their mornings began before sunrise, running the cracked river trail while the city still slept, Nix pacing perfectly at Lena's knee, ears swiveling at distant sounds while Lena breathed in the cold air and felt steady for the first time each day. At the precinct, Nix was known not just as a police dog but as a constant, an anchor, the one who lay silently under desks during paperwork hours and exploded into motion only when duty called, her loyalty absolute and instinctive. Lena talked to her in the quiet moments, not in words meant to be answered, but in thoughts she trusted Nix somehow understood, about the weight of the badge, the growing tension in the streets, the feeling that something in the city had shifted lately, like a pressure change before a storm. Nix, in turn, watched Lena with an intensity that bordered on devotion, tracking her mood, mirroring her calm, stiffening whenever Lena's shoulders tightened. They had been paired for 3 years, long enough to develop a rhythm so seamless it felt less like teamwork and more like a shared heartbeat, forged through long nights, abandoned buildings, missing person searches, and moments where Nix's nose and courage had brought people home alive. Outside of work, their life was quiet and sparse, a small apartment with a view of rusted fire escapes, a single worn couch and a dog bed positioned carefully beside Lena's own, where Nix slept lightly, always alert even in rest. On Lena's rare days off they trained anyway, running obstacle courses in empty lots, practicing commands until Nix's movements were flawless, precise, almost beautiful because Lena believed preparation was a kind of love. Yet beneath that disciplined routine, unease had begun to creep in. Calls were getting stranger, backups arriving slower, reports quietly reassigned or erased, and during patrols Nix had started pausing longer at intersections, hackles rising for reasons Lena couldn't see, nose tracing scents that didn't belong to the streets they knew so well. Once, late at night, Nix refused to move forward down a familiar block, planting her paws and releasing a low warning growl that sent a chill through Lena's spine, even though the street looked empty and still. Lena had brushed it off then, trusting procedure over instinct, but the city no longer felt predictable, and even inside the precinct walls there were whispers of officers keeping their heads down, of cases better left untouched. Nix sensed it all, the tension, the fear, the unspoken rules changing, and her behavior shifted subtly, staying closer, positioning herself between Lena and shadows, scanning doorways with heightened focus. On the night everything began to unravel, rain slicked the streets into mirrors and the radio crackled with a call that felt routine on the surface but carried a wrongness Lena couldn't name, and as she clipped Nix's harness into place, she felt that familiar tightening in her chest. Nix leaned into her leg for a brief moment, grounding her, then lifted her head sharply, ears forward, body coiled, as if she already knew that whatever waited ahead was not just another call, but the edge of something darker that had been watching them for a long time. The rain thickened as Lena guided the cruiser through narrowing streets where streetlights flickered like failing signals, Nix seated rigidly in the back, muscles taut, nose lifting again and again as if catching fragments of a scent that refused to settle, and with every block the sense of being guided into something unseen tightened around them. The call led them to an industrial stretch near the river, a place half abandoned and forgotten, where warehouses loomed like darkened sentinels and the sound of water slapping concrete echoed too loudly, and before Lena even stepped out of the vehicle Nix let out a sharp, urgent whine that cut through the rain, her paws scraping against the floor as she pressed toward the door, signaling danger with a clarity that made Lena's pulse spike. The area should have been quiet, yet the air felt crowded, heavy with layered scents, old oil, damp metal, something sharp and human that didn't belong, and Nix moved ahead once released, her body low, ears pinned forward, every step deliberate as she swept the shadows with practiced precision. The deeper they went between the warehouses, the more Nix's behavior shifted from alert to protective, repeatedly circling back to Lena's side, positioning herself between her handler and every dark opening, hackles raised as distant metallic sounds echoed and then stopped abruptly, leaving only the rain and the pounding of Lena's heart. Backup was delayed again, radio static swallowing responses, and the city felt impossibly far away as Nick suddenly froze, nose pressed to the ground, tracking a fresh trail that cut sharply toward a narrow service alley barely wide enough for a vehicle. And despite every instinct screaming caution, duty pulled Lena forward. Halfway down the alley, Nix's low growl deepened, vibrating through the wet concrete, her muscles bunching as if restraining herself from lunging, and that was when Lena noticed the subtle signs of movement ahead, a shadow shifting where there should have been none, footsteps muffled by rain yet unmistakably human. The moment stretched thin, breath held, the world narrowed to Nix's rigid form and the darkness beyond, and then chaos erupted as figures burst from concealment with sudden speed, the air filling with confusion, impact, and violence that unfolded too fast for thought. Nix reacted instantly, launching herself forward not in aggression but in interception, placing her body between Lena and the attackers, absorbing blows meant for her handler as Lena struggled to regain footing on the slick ground, radio clattering uselessly. The attackers moved with unsettling coordination, faces obscured, movements trained, and in the flurry Nix was struck hard, her body slamming into the pavement, yet even then she fought to rise, teeth bared, eyes locked not in fear but in fierce resolve. Lena went down moments later, the world spinning, vision blurring as rain mixed with blood, and through the ringing in her ears she felt Nix's weight press against her, the dog dragging herself back despite injury, positioning her body protectively over Lena's chest as if sheer will could shield them both. Footsteps retreated suddenly, melting back into the darkness, leaving only the echo of their escape and the cold realization that this had never been a routine call, that someone had wanted silence, not arrest. Nix trembled violently, breath coming in ragged pulls, one eye swelling shut, but she refused to move away, her tail thumping weakly against Lena's leg as she scanned the alley with what strength she had left, tracking scents that lingered like ghosts. Time stretched unbearably as rain continued to fall, radios remained dead, and the sense of being watched refused to fade, Nix growling softly at intervals, warning of presence just beyond sight, and then, faintly at first, another sound emerged beneath the rain, not hurried or panicked, but measured, controlled, footsteps approaching from the opposite end of the alley. Nix's head lifted with effort, ears twitching, nose flaring as she inhaled deeply, and her posture changed, not relaxing but sharpening, as if recognizing something different in this new presence, something disciplined and dangerous in its own way. The figure that slowly emerged remained partially obscured by shadow, moving with a confidence that suggested neither law enforcement nor criminal, and as Nix summoned the last of her strength to issue a warning growl, the rain seemed to hush, the alley holding its breath, because whoever was approaching had not come running, had not come afraid, and had clearly been tracking the same threat from the darkness long before Lena and her loyal canine ever stepped into it. The figure stepped fully into the dim spill of the streetlight, rain sliding off a dark jacket worn not like a uniform but like a second skin, posture impossibly steady, movements economical, eyes scanning the alley not with surprise but with confirmation, as if this moment had been anticipated long before it arrived, and Nix felt it instantly, the shift in the air from chaotic threat to controlled danger, her growl faltering into a strained, wary rumble as Lena fought consciousness beneath her. The world narrowing to pain and pressure and the crushing fear that she had failed her partner, yet the approaching presence knelt slowly, deliberately, hands open, attention fixed not on Lena but on the shadows that still breathed at the alley's edges. The rain could not drown the sounds that followed, subtle signals carried through the darkness, a scrape of boots, a breath held too long, and in that instant Nix understood what humans could not, that the danger had not retreated but repositioned, circling back with predatory patience, and with a surge of raw instinct she forced herself upright despite the agony tearing through her body, planting herself between Lena and the approaching shadows just as movement exploded again from the far end of the alley. What followed unfolded with terrifying speed, figures rushing in with renewed violence, believing their work unfinished, unaware they had crossed into a trap set by someone who hunted hunters, and before Lena could even scream Nix launched herself forward, her injured body driven by nothing but devotion, colliding with the nearest attacker and buying a fraction of a second that changed everything. The man from the shadows moved then, not reacting but executing, flowing through the chaos with lethal precision, disarming one assailant, dropping another, using the narrow alley as an advantage rather than a constraint, and in the confusion Nix fought through pain and fear alike, teeth clamping down, body shielding, refusing to yield even as blows rained around her. The attackers faltered as their coordination shattered under unexpected resistance, realizing too late that the silence they had counted on had been broken by a force they did not understand, and as they retreated once more, this time in true panic, Nix collapsed beside Lena, strength finally draining away, her duty fulfilled even as her vision blurred. The rain seemed to pause again as the man returned to Lena's side, working quickly, efficiently, stemming blood, checking vitals, his calm cutting through the chaos like a blade, and as Lena's eyes fluttered open she saw not a badge but something older in his bearing, scars beneath skin, eyes that had seen war and learned how to end it, and though no words were exchanged, understanding passed between them. Sirens finally wailed in the distance, delayed but coming fast now, and only then did the man step back, melting once more toward the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the certainty that this attack had not been random, that someone powerful had wanted Lena erased, and that someone else had decided that would not happen. Nyx stirred weakly as paramedics flooded the alley, her body lifted with care, her injuries grave but survivable, and as Lena was loaded beside her, hand resting against Nyx's fur, she understood with crushing clarity that it was her partner who had saved her life, not just by fighting, but by sensing the truth before it was visible, by refusing to abandon her even when broken, by standing her ground until help arrived from the most unexpected place. Days later, as the investigation quietly unraveled threads of corruption no one spoke about openly, whispers circulated through the precinct about a former Navy SEAL operating off the books, a ghost who intervened when the system failed its own, but Lena needed no confirmation, because she remembered the way the man had moved, the way Nyx had recognized him not as a threat but as something aligned with purpose. Nyx survived surgery, scars mapping her bravery, her recovery slow and painful, yet every time Lena visited, the dog's tail thumped against the floor with stubborn joy, eyes bright with the same unwavering loyalty, and in those moments Lena understood that courage did not always wear medals or uniforms, that sometimes it came on four legs, bleeding and unbowed, standing between darkness and the one she loved, and that when the world tried to silence them both, it was that bond, forged in trust and sacrifice, that proved impossible to break. The weeks that followed unfolded slowly, measured not in headlines or commendations but in quiet hospital corridors, rehabilitation rooms, and the steady rhythm of breath shared between a wounded officer and the dog who refused to let her go, as Lena woke each morning to the reality that survival carried its own weight, a mixture of gratitude and grief for how close everything had come to ending. Nyx's recovery became the axis around which Lena's world turned, the dog's battered body wrapped in bandages, her movements tentative at first, yet her spirit unmistakably intact, eyes tracking Lena with the same unwavering focus even when pain made every step an effort. The veterinarian spoke carefully, emphasizing rest, patience, time, but they also spoke with a reverence reserved for animals who had crossed a threshold, whose injuries told a story of sacrifice that words could not fully capture. Lena, sidelined from duty, spent her days beside Nyx's kennel or later on the floor of her apartment when the dog was finally allowed home, sleeping nearby despite discomfort, refusing distance, their bond deepening not through action but through presence, through shared silence and the understanding that neither had been abandoned when it mattered most. The investigation moved quietly, deliberately, names surfacing only in sealed reports, transfers happening without explanation, and while the city continued on its surface-level routines, something fundamental shifted beneath, a subtle recalibration sparked by the fact that an attempt to erase one officer had failed because loyalty and instinct could not be predicted or controlled. Lena learned that some truths would never be spoken aloud, that the man from the shadows would remain just that, a ghost in the margins of her memory, yet his intervention mattered less to her than the reality that Nyx had recognized danger before it arrived, had chosen pain over retreat, had anchored Lena to life when everything else fell away. Physical therapy tested them both, Nyx relearning balance, strength, confidence in a body that bore scars as permanent reminders, Lena pushing through her own injuries, frustration flaring when progress felt too slow, but each small victory became shared, a successful step mirrored by a wagging tail, a completed lap rewarded not with treats but with touch and quiet reassurance. Nights were the hardest, when rain against windows could still trigger flashes of memory, when Lena would wake with her heart racing only to feel Nyx's weight pressed firmly against her legs, a grounding force that reminded her she was not alone, that survival had not been accidental but earned through devotion. Gradually the fear loosened its grip, replaced by a deeper, steadier resolve, and Lena began to understand that what she and Nyx shared had evolved beyond partnership into something closer to kinship, a bond forged not just by training and duty but by mutual willingness to stand in harm's way. When clearance finally came for light-duty visits to the precinct, Nyx walked beside Lena with a new quiet authority, her scars visible, her presence commanding a respect that required no explanation, officers falling silent as they passed, recognizing that they were witnessing something rare and humbling. There were no grand ceremonies, no speeches broadcast to the public, Just a small acknowledgement recorded in official language that could never fully convey the truth, that a dog had saved an officer's life and in doing so had exposed the fragility of systems that relied too heavily on silence. Lena didn't need medals or validation, she needed Nick's whole or as whole as she could be, and in time the dog returned to work in a limited capacity, her instincts as sharp as ever, her loyalty undiminished, each step forward a testament to resilience. On quiet evenings, they returned to the river trail where their days once began, moving slower now, savoring the simple act of forward motion. Lena acutely aware of how easily those moments could have been lost, Nick's attentive but peaceful, content in proximity rather than vigilance. The city still held shadows, still carried risks that could not be erased, but Lena no longer believed that courage was found solely in confrontation. She saw it in endurance, in healing, in the choice to trust again despite what had been revealed. Nyx aged slightly faster after her injuries, stiffness settling in on cold mornings, yet her eyes never dulled, and when she leaned against Lena it carried the same message it always had, that no matter how uncertain the world became, they would face it together. Months later, as files were quietly closed and reassigned, Lena found peace not in answers but in acceptance, knowing that the truth of that night lived not in reports but in scars, in the echo of rain, in the memory of a dog who refused to leave her side. She understood then that loyalty was not blind obedience but conscious choice, that love could be expressed through action rather than words, and that sometimes the purest form of heroism was simply standing firm when retreat would have been easier. Nyx rested her head on Lena's knee as the sun dipped below the skyline, the city humming softly around them, and in that stillness Lena felt something settle deep within her, a certainty that whatever darkness existed beyond their reach, it had been held at bay once by 4 determined paws and an unbreakable bond, and that knowledge would carry her forward long after the scars had faded, a reminder that courage, when shared between human and animal, could withstand even the most deliberate attempts to extinguish it.